Well, I'm delighted today to be speaking to Rob Garrett, serial entrepreneur and investor, co-founder of Regenerate here in Singapore. Welcome, Rob.
David, it's great to see you back in Singapore after so long.
Fantastic. So we're going to have a little chat today about family business, about impact investing. But before we get into that, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your background.
Sure. I've spent the last 13 years working in, with and for families. I started out my early career as an officer in the British Army. And it was a serendipitous outcome that I landed up working, first of all, as the Chief of Staff to the Duke of Richmond, who owns Goodwood, a 300-year-old estate in the UK. And at Goodwood, I had a multitude of different experiences and exposures. I'm sure many people who are familiar with Private Client Dining Club know Goodwood and have been there, but it's famous for its motor racing activities and car culture activities, and then also for the horse racing, but there's a lot more that goes on there across the sporting panacea. And at Goodwood, I had my sort of first exposure to the international markets from the commercial side. Obviously, I'd been around the world a bit with the Army previously, and I am a child of expats going back to my early years, which has brought me full circle back to Singapore now. But I had a stop off in 2013 to 17 in Dubai, where I went to be the Chief of Staff to the first non-family CEO of Sol Kerzner's International Hospitality Development Organisation. And again, there I got exposure of working in a family-founded firm, but one that had grown inorganically through having institutional investors come into the business. And that business subsequently had a change of control where Sol left the business. Sol sadly is lately departed, and the business was then bought over eventually by Investment Corporation of Dubai, the sovereign wealth fund of Dubai. So I had exposure sort of across the spectrum of private investors. So in that business we had a lot of ultra high net worth clients who wanted to be individual property owners, but then at the holdco level we had a lot of institutional investors, Investment Corporation of Dubai, Colony Capital, Goldman Asset Management, and at a propco level, Fosun, the Chinese conglomerate. So I got a lot of international exposure there. And then through following my wife's very successful career in property, we ended up in Singapore 5.5 years ago. And for the last 5.5 years, I've been building a variety of businesses. So for 8 years now, I've had a collaboration with a fourth generation family member from a large UK consumer family who is a friend of mine who is based out of Dubai and has a variety of operating business interests. But with him, we've been focusing on sort of building investment cases and collaborating with families in syndicate investments. And a lot of that over the last 3 to 4 years has grown into the impact space, born out of my own personal conviction and desire to see change in the world. And that's led most recently to what I'm sort of principally working on, which is Regenerate, which is a new VCC company that we're setting up in Singapore with a focus on investing in pre-seed and seed stage regenerative impact ventures, or at least businesses that are on a journey to becoming regenerative. So that's going beyond just sustainability, beyond just mitigating the effects that we're causing out of the way that we do business, but actually focusing on businesses having positive impacts on the natural capital of ecosystems in the world, and also the societal capital of the places that we go and build businesses. So we're obviously here in Asia and focused on building an ecosystem, collaborating with families around Asia, but with also global families that want to access the Asian growth story, but where we then go into markets where perhaps labour costs are not so high. There is a consequence there. The level of education may not be so high, the healthcare provision may not be so high, access to socially, financially inclusive capital may not be so high. So we seek to work with community and natural ecosystems to regenerate and create positive outcomes there.
You're clearly passionate about the impact sector. I mean, tell us a little bit more about what's the origins of your interest in this field?
Look, I think it really started, I first got exposure to it back at Goodwood. And I guess in a way, having been an army officer and been to some places, around the world, and seen the worst of what humankind can do to one another, I'm trying to assuage, part of my guilt, personal guilt, part of, the collective guilt that perhaps we carry as a global society. I don't necessarily place any blame with the British Armed Forces. At the end of the day, we're sent to do the bidding of politicians, and we go and do a job, and largely that job is about creating security outcomes so that local populations can rebuild their own society. But having seen the worst of it, then when I went to Goodwood, when one looks at the cover of the book of Goodwood, people might think, oh, motor racing, car culture, that's not very sustainable. But actually, Goodwood's story around sustainability is pretty interesting. They developed under the direction of the Duchess of Richmond, the largest organic farm. So Goodwood, under the tenure of the current Duke and Duchess, has transitioned to being wholly organic farming, implemented one of the largest wood chip biomass generators on the farm to power a lot of the farm buildings and equipment. There's a huge agroforestry side to the Goodwood estate, and large pieces of the estate that are regenerative by nature, replanting trees, recultivating the land. And so I got exposure to it there. Then when I was with Kerzner, we were operating some of the world's leading luxury resorts, one and only. And I guess there were two sides to that. We were seeing from the guests who were coming and staying there a growing desire to be sustainable, a growing requirement to know that they were getting the best in class in terms of the sourcing of the food and beverage that they were having, but also in the resorts they wanted to know that the resorts were living in a balance with their natural ecosystems and not destroying ecosystems. And so I got exposure to it there, and I don't think anyone can claim that they are on a perfect trajectory. And it's been an evolution since I started at Kerzner in 2013, and my journey's been through that. And then when we moved to Singapore, I had exposure already to some investment cases in green energy in buildings and retrofitting buildings to make them more sustainable. When we moved here, we got fairly swift exposure to the world of Southeast Asia. So, we're very lucky to be based here, to be able to travel around the islands of Indonesian archipelagos and, travel to Vietnam and Thailand. And I guess the real moment of epiphany for me, when I really started to want to focus on this wholesale, was taking my now 10-year-old son for a canoe off a beach off a Bintan resort called Trikora. And he was 6, 5.5 or something at the time, and I took him for a canoe, and we paddled for about half a kilometre, and then pulled the canoe up onto the beach and started walking on the beach. And I was just chatting away to him, and we were doing a bit of beach combing, and I just said, "What can you see?" And he said, "Oh, sticks and this." And I said, "No, what can you really see?" And just seeing the devastation that we're causing to the natural ecosystems. The beach was littered, literally littered with plastic. And so, I guess, this is a bold statement, but my life's mission now is to try and, utilize the networks that I have been lucky enough to create through employment and through entrepreneurship, to engage with, discuss, I think, as much as anything, by discussion and by mutual sort of sharing of objectives, educate families of wealth, and then Regenerate is sort of the culmination of a few years' work and partnership with a group of others to create opportunity for families to be able to invest actively in the space of energy and the environment, food and water, and consumer circularity and waste as core themes.
Do you think family businesses have a special role in impact investing versus perhaps larger institutional governmental players? Do you think that families can have a specific role in this space?
Look, I think that the unique factor around family businesses, and I'm not a statistician, but I've read many statistics. Something like 75% of the world's GDP is generated by family businesses. I think they have a unique role in that, largely speaking, a disproportionate number of family businesses remain private. And by remaining private, they are able to make decisions more nimbly with a less distributed decision-making framework. So that means that, by rights, some of them or all of them should be able to unilaterally say, we get it, we understand why it's good business, and we're heading in this direction. Now that's juxtaposed against the narrative whereby, here in Asia, but also elsewhere in the world, there has been a misconception from private investors, the private capital market, and I think to a greater or lesser extent, even the public and institutional market, that for the last 10 years or so, since ESG as a term has been wholesale recognised, and that's really accelerated in the last 3-4 years, but there's been a misconception. People have thought, well, ESG is just a lens on a portfolio, and actually it's not going to make us money. And now in 2022, we are really moving forward with a narrative where ESG is almost going to be the defining characteristic for every portfolio, and whether it's public or private. And let's distinguish that I think ESG is a terminology that has grown up in the public markets. I focus on impact investing, which I think is the private markets. That's a very sort of broad description, but I think that, by right, families should be able to move unilaterally, and they should be able to redeploy their capital to impact much more quickly. But they also have a distinction that they can also, whilst they can deploy it quickly, they can stay in for the long term. They can be patient holders of capital. So there is a very exciting and large opportunity working with family businesses, ultra high net worth investors in the space who are, today, having seen big technology going through some pretty obvious challenges. 11,000 Meta employees unfortunately being laid off yesterday, and learning most of them this morning whether they were going to be hit by that cull. There are some very big challenges for public markets. There are some very exciting times for private markets, but even within the private markets, there are dislocations such that growth stocks have been hit by the impact of public markets, and there has been a historic correlation. And in 22 and 23, I think we're going to find a unique time where the innovation agenda around environment, clean tech is going to accelerate at pace. That's fostered by big initiatives like the COP27 meeting, but also things like the Business Roundtable, I think was the name of the group, fostered by big CEOs of public companies who are saying we're moving from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and we're just seeking to harness a small niche within that.
What's your assessment of advisors tabling these subjects with clients? I mean, you mentioned that there's a panoply of terms. Are advisors sufficiently knowledgeable in the traditional worlds of on banking or tax or law, fiduciary roles, and are they proactively tabling it with clients, do you think?
I think, definitely I see more and more of the narrative around, be it ESG or impact investing. There's more content being produced, right? And I think, every professional services firm that I run into, they are seeking to evolve their strategy, their narrative around it, and quickly do so. To give an analogous example, another domain that I have done bits in, blockchain. It's a bit like we're at the point in time. We're still at the vanguard, right, of this space. But it's a bit like someone saying wanted blockchain analyst with 22 years experience. They just don't exist, right? And by the same token, whilst you might have lawyers with 25 years of professionally qualified experience, they probably don't have. Some do. 25 years of experience of advising on renewable technologies, or the structure of different investment vehicles around that. We do have a universe of global experts, right, who have been around for 20, 25 years, and there are many people. It's not just Greta Thunberg. I think what Greta Thunberg has to say resonates a lot with me as a parent of 2 young children, and I don't disagree with anything she says. I do disagree sometimes with the way that some of these activist groups implement stuff. And I think, going back to your question about professional advisors, it's challenging, right? Because professional advisors need to continue to do the work for their clients. And ultimately, they are in some ways a bit reactive because of that. So, being proactive about producing content and creating narrative and reporting and stuff on it, they are doing. But then being able to go, whether it's a lawyer or a banker or, an accounting firm, and going and saying, have you thought about this? Here's a structure.
It's very different, isn't it?
They're a bit more reactive, I guess, by definition.
But clients are coming to them now in greater number, are they? Is this what you see, that they're actually challenging advisors, that they're getting on board with the projects and then presenting it to advisors?
Yeah, I mean, part of the work that I do, so under Regenerate, I have a small sub-brand called Asian Future, which operates effectively like a think tank for family offices, family office investors, to come together and to share on a family-to-family basis and to ask questions. I think that there are lots of families who are seeking to educate themselves, right? And when one looks at a spectrum of family business or ultra high net worth business, if you put a room together of 100 individuals who are classified under that definition, you are probably going to get 70 to 75 different sort of outcomes on a scattergram of where they focus, what they're interested in, what kind of return they want, etc. But I do believe that by putting these people together, there is an innate trust between peers, right? And that's a difference between the universe of professional advisors and their clients. There is a distinction there. Whereas if you put peers together, they can often sort of get more comfort and share. And that's, that's a big focus of what we do. I think everyone is trying to get up the curve. Everyone is trying to educate themselves. And I don't claim to be an expert. I don't claim to be any more expert than the next person. And we want to build a collaborative ecosystem, and we're trying to harness a small microcosm of the global universe of family businesses and ultra high net worths out there who have capital to deploy. There are more initiatives by the clientele, and there are more initiatives by the client advisors, and we support all of them.
Do you find that certain sectors are easier for clients to get behind, for example, like environmental causes, versus other parts of the impact spectrum, which might be more on social change or different objectives? Do you find that there is certain core values that everyone can get behind, certain projects that are more obvious and easy, or what's your sense of that?
Yeah, so coming back to my sort of fairly generic statement of, if you've got a room of 100 potential clients or clients, you're going to get 70 different outcomes. By the same token, I think that the causes that people want to get behind largely will relate to something that has impacted their own life.
Yeah.
Be that in their business life. If they are a real estate wealth generated family, they're far more likely to get behind something that's around new building materials, energy consumption in buildings, something like that. If they have built their wealth in agriculture, they're probably far more likely to get behind, agri-tech or cellular-based meats or new foods or whatever it may be. But where we try and focus is by creating the expertise of having lead investors who are co-investing alongside us, who then are the specialists. So be they an agriculture family who then say, right, there's an agri-tech deal that sits in the diversification spectrum of what you're doing as an investment company. and we want to lead on co-investing in that agri-tech deal. And I do think that, as a sort of generalized statement, a trend that we have seen emerge, and I have seen emerge, particularly over the last sort of 5 years of my time working in the family business space, is that family-to-family co-investment is huge. So, you could get a family from the UK or Germany or the US who want to come into Asia to access the Asian growth story. They can look at the macro story and say 650 million people in Southeast Asia, 2.4 billion people, within a 4-hour radius of Singapore, and they go, that's an exciting story. How do I get access to it? But then they also look at it and go, but I don't really understand the market. And so they want to come and collaborate with people who have built their businesses here. And there, I think the focus is co-investing with someone who has a real expertise in a domain. To try and answer your question, I think, Singapore as a destination has set out its stall that it is going to be a capital for private wealth and private banking, and it's also going to be a capital for the ESG green impact agenda. And within that, it's made some very strong moves, particularly in the future food space. So, got some very large success stories at early stage, like Tyndall, the sort of new chicken, alternative chicken. You've got, Just Eat. Singapore has set out its stall that it's going to be a destination for both private capital and the green impact agenda. And within that, you've got some huge success stories. I think one of the really interesting things about Singapore, as well as Dubai and the wider Middle East region where I've lived before and continue to go and do business, and our business is originated in, is the strength of the support from the sovereign wealth funds as well. So, the sovereign wealth funds often play a lead role in defining a trend that then family businesses want to follow and invest alongside in. And even last night I was talking to a sovereign wealth fund, and they are really interested in learning what are Southeast Asian families interested in. But as a broader scope within impact, healthcare and biotechnology, education, the impact domain is very wide from a personal standpoint, and I think the largest growing trend is decarbonisation and energy. We have to get to a path where our energy production, moves away from, hydrocarbon-based fuels, and we've seen with the impact of the Ukraine crisis and the Russia's war there, that that has had a large impact on energy prices globally, and that's forcing the issue to be brought into more consideration, and that's perhaps a focus of COP27. But there's a huge scope for that, but there's a huge scope for global health as well. We've just come out of a pandemic, which has brought into focus global health as well.
Does COP make a difference? I mean, I suppose it's in the headlines at least, so at least it's on the visibility side. The family business sector or high net worth clients are seeing more about it. But what's your read on the importance of these kind of summits?
I'm a bit torn. On the one hand, we could paraphrase Tesco's and say every little helps. I think having visibility around it does help. But by the same token, I did a post the other day. I think that there's a huge disparity between COP27 and the people having these discussions, certainly at a political level, and the society they seek to reflect. So my post was about the fact that, I think it was 56 men, largely of late middle age, and 4 women representing countries. That's wrong. That's plain wrong. We've got to have a fair sense of equality. And, when 51% of the global population is female, they need to be fairly represented in those conversations. I would hope that just like at Davos, which is another, big collection, in the side rooms and the conversations between corporate leaders, there is a lot more female representation. It certainly does bring into focus. I can't recall, certainly from when I was, entering my adult years, COP having happened so frequently, back in the early 2000s. And the cycle seems to have accelerated. I guess the challenge is that when you've only had 9 months since the last COP and you've got another one, people are expecting outcomes. And these outcomes can and do take a long time to bed in and to flow through. And so, look, it's good that these conversations are happening, but actually what we need is real leadership. And I think that one of the challenges we face as a global society is we live at times where we've never had such a vacuum of real leadership. Political leadership is, to look at the UK, I'm a citizen of the UK, we've had a complete vacuum where we now have, Rishi Sunak, who hopefully will steady the ship, and then we can have a genuine contest between His Majesty's opposition and His Majesty's government at the next general election, whenever that comes. And I think that needs to happen for a positive outcome for the UK to be better regarded on a global stage. You juxtapose that against places like Singapore and the UAE, where they have had and continue to have tremendously stable political leadership for years and years. I think the one thing that really facilitates in places like Singapore and the UAE, having that stability of leadership and stability of tenure of one political party or absolute monarchy in the UAE, is that they can put in place true long-term planning. And that's one of the things that I think has challenged the UK, continues to challenge the US political system, and continues to challenge investors from those markets who then look elsewhere. I think it's a really positive thing. Let's not get into the political debate about, representation, fair representation and everything else. But I think it's a really positive thing when people can actually see what is our 5, 10 and 20-year plan and how we're going to deal with climate change, food security and all these other issues. But it's, it comes with every equation has a positive and a negative side to it.
Well, Rob, terrific to talk to you today. We look forward to sharing this interview. Thank you.
David, real pleasure, and thanks for coming back and looking forward to seeing all your guests on Monday.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.